Morning, everybody. Happy Saturday all around. Morning, Chris and Martin, Denise, hey Karen, hey Chris, hey Lisa and Dad and Sue, hey Larry and Dina. Morning all around. Hey Katie. Hey Sue, hey Mary, hey Casey. Hey Kathleen, hey everybody. I'm just cleaning today, so since I'm mostly just cleaning today, I didn't want to interrupt my flow too much. But I do have to go do some errands eventually. Hey Todd, hey Mary. Hey Geraldine. Some Helen Ward. There's a different Helen Ward song. We haven't ever had this one on before. All right, I just got an email from Graceland about Johann Hawk. Hey, Carolina. Hey, Pam and Jen and Eileen, hey, Nikki. Hey, Phoenix and Susan. That's not too cold. I just got too much to do around the house to interrupt my flow by leaving. I'm doing about 5 different things at once. Hey, Heather. Yeah, I'm matching the chair. Yeah, I'm even dressed down in just a regular old sweatshirt today. This is awfully dressed down for me. Usually I like to, I when I'm going to be broadcasting, I do, comb my hair and put on something a little bit nicer. Miles and Priya are over in a nice warm bed right now. We'll give it just a second. Ooh, how is the London fog? I thought about getting some of those. I saw a little thing of them at Aldi. Hey, Nancy. You're getting me really in my civvies today. It's cleaning day. We got some company coming over tonight. This is a different Benny Goodman episode from the same run that's playing right now. This is from about a month after the one that we normally play. Or 6 weeks after. February 17th, 1936, Joseph Urban Room at the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Hey, Kathy and Edwina. Yeah, the place warmed right up once they got the thing fixed. Luckily, it was blasting by yesterday. Thank goodness, it got a lot colder out yesterday. Alright, we'll let them finish up this tune, and then I'll start the presentation for the morning. Hang on a sec. Also, the light that normally goes in the glass lamp burned out after... It's been 3 or 4 years now that we've had that lamp. That light. But, time to replace. It looks like there's now an app to replace fuel bulbs. That helps a lot. But I just started to see that I hit the right bridge.
How do you like a combination like this? Benny Goodman and his swing music and Hoagie Carmichael's Immortal Stardust. Listen up.
All right, everybody. There's Benny wrapping up. That one that used to be on archive. I'm glad I downloaded it while it was on archive. But welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tour, speaking of downloading stuff on archive. Today, what we're going to be doing is yesterday, as I mentioned, I had a research day lined up at the History Museum over in the Microfilm rooms. I've been there about once a week lately. I feel like I've got pretty much all I need to really get started on the book. But still finding more stuff. Mostly yesterday, there were only a couple of Johann Hawk articles that I needed to find. Beyond that, it was mostly just looking up articles by Gene Cowgill, the reporter that I've been writing about on the Patreon all this past week, who landed an interview with Hawk. The version that I was able to find online was from August of 1905. Just shortly after he engaged Gene's boyfriend, the lawyer Frank Comerford, as his new lawyer. But just over the course of it, not only did I find a lot of good Gene Cowgill articles, I also just found some random stuff and a major find regarding that Johann Hawk interview. So what we're going to do today, I'm just going to talk you through some of the gems from the microfilm mines. So, first thing I saw looking up, these are all 1905 articles. Here's this one, Thugs in Revel. Here's the thing about the Chicago Chronicle. They liked talking about thugs. This was the term that they used at the time. The word thug has undergone a long history. Initially referred to a gang in India, then it just meant any kind of no-goodnik, and now it still sometimes means that, but also it has more different racial connotations now. But a lot of the articles, they kind of reminded me of this crap that's been filling up our mailbox all through election season with darkened out... with nonsense about the Safety Act and darkened out mugshots like that OJ cover from the 90s. You see a lot of this in the Chicago Chronicle from this era. But then you see things like this. Seems that in Evanston in 1905, police were really cracking down on speeding, as they called it at the time, scorching. Now, I'm not really clear whether by scorching here they meant speeding or blowing past the traffic cops. But at the time, there wasn't that much traffic, so the traffic cops would try to slow you down by hand everywhere they went. Some people would blow light by, so they just started shooting their tires out. What could go wrong? But then I also found this one. I haven't read this one yet, but a lot of these ones from like the Sunday Pullout magazine. This is a long one. Vendettas of the evening press result in bloody warfare by hired thugs. There we are with the thugs again. But this one is all about the circulation wars, which is not something that major newspapers normally covered at the time. It's something they usually reminisced about years later. Some of the smaller papers would cover it, but this was a whole thing where newspapers were hiring, like farm team gangsters. Some of these people did grow up to be actual 1920s mobsters, but in the 1905s, how your circulation went on the street was huge. So there was a whole lot of pressure being put on newsstands. And when Hearst came into the Chicago market with the Chicago Evening American, one of the first things he did was hire the guys who ran the sluggers at the Chicago Tribune. He brought them over to the American and got them to change all of the rules. That's really what got them onto the stands at the time. It's kind of what you had to do to break into a major market. They're being specifically vendettas of the evening press. They were particularly ripping on the Hearst papers here, the Chicago Examiner, the Chicago Evening American. They spent a lot of time just ranting about the Hearst papers just in general. Like the Chicago Chronicle was really all that much better. The Chicago American was definitely highly sensationalistic, but they were also doing a lot of great investigative journalism that kind of gets brushed off these days. Whereas... every Sunday during this era, Gene Cowgill, a writer who had been around for quite a long time by then, she was into her early 30s, she'd interviewed people like Thomas Edison, Marconi, the wireless telegraph inventor, who told her that one day telephones will be placed by a pocket edition that we carry with us everywhere and can call anyone in the world without even using wires. That would have been about 1902. In 1905, 1904, and 1905, she was doing a whole series of articles, just like human interest articles and scenes from city life articles that we usually just lengthier reporting in the Sunday issues. Like this one was about Chinese women in Chicago getting advanced ideas from the Reform Association. And that was the Chinese American Reform Association that did some military drills with the hope of eventually reforming the government in China itself, but also was doing things like phasing out some of the old-fashioned ideas. Like she asked, is it true that you're binding your daughter's feet? And he said, no, nobody's done that in 30 or 40 years. It was a very interesting article. I mean, she's kind of baffled by this stuff. It's all very it's a little 1905-ish. But as a 1905 article goes about Chinese American women in Chicago, it's really on the cusp, especially considering before that I had found her other article. There was a whole series she did called Perils of a Great City, which was all about all the different perils there were to young women in the city, which was pretty much any place that they might gather without a schoolmarm present to make sure that no undesirables came in, nobody did any swearing, nobody ordered any alcohol. So this was a whole article. Chop suey joints, a menace to morality. Honestly, the article itself is not as bad as it sounds. It's still pretty bad, but she makes a very big point of saying she doesn't object to chop suey. She doesn't object to the fact that some of the proprietors are marrying white women, in fact, but they're always full of a bad element of people. They attract bad customers. The racial overtones are impossible to ignore nowadays, but frankly, as a 1905 article about chop suey joints goes, it's not too bad. She's mostly just upset that for the same reason she's upset about ice cream parlors. But more particularly, dance halls. Another episode of Pitfalls of a Great City, the evils of Chicago's public dance halls. With many of these have just delightful illustrations. I love the look on this dude's face. We'll see some more of this same illustrator and just a little bit more about him here, too. Well, this was another article from this series, Gambling Devices for Children. It was kind of like the equivalent of back then of a bear claw machine. I haven't had a chance to read the article yet. I'm also very excited to read her article about women detectives. And this is a pretty cool one. This thief walking by with his alligator purse. I know it's not a purse, it's a utility bag. And behind him, around the corner, lurks the woman detective, ready to pounce. Haven't read this one yet. I'm very excited to get to that. There's also, you notice that I never have the entire title on here. These articles are so big, the opening pictures are so big that I couldn't zoom out enough to fit them all on the microfilm screen. So I could paste a couple of them together. I got a few of them that I could try that with, but the Chronicle was their headlines were too big at the time. The next one, work of the new murder bureau to make Chicago unpopular with thugs. Here we got this cartoon burglar being captured in a net by the new murder bureau. What's the date on this one? August 27. This is right after Chief O'Neill resigned. About a month after, there was a new police chief who was mostly working against gamblers at the time, raiding every gambling hall in town. But it's a start. There's also, she noticed that there was a place where women played the races. Big secret affair. Once again, another very lurid illustration here. Now, all of these illustrations, here's the cool part. All of the illustrations that went with the Jean Cowgirls were drawn by a guy named Dan Sayer Gracebach. Now, Dan Sayer Gracebach had a long and storied career. He did some of the Uncle Sam posters. And also later on, he was hired by Cecil B. DeMille to do early versions of storyboards and costume designs. In what they called the pre-cinematic era, he did a lot of what we would now call storyboards, a whole lot of paintings, many of which still survived. It was a long and varied career, but one thing we haven't really covered enough with him on, honestly, is his newspaper illustrations for Jean Cowgill, including the illustration when she interviewed Johann Hawk. So this is her interview with Johann Hawk that I sent with the Gracebach illustration that I sent out on the Patreon, in the Hawk and Holmes tier of the Patreon the other day. But as with usual, you see this one is not from the Chicago Chronicle. This is a digitized version of it that ran with the Evansville, Indiana Courier in August of 1905, a couple of weeks after Hawk fired his original lawyer and hired Frank Comerford, who just happened to be Jean Cowgill's boyfriend at the time. Later they would get married, and later than that, divorced. But here's another Gracebach illustration surrounded by all of these women, and I wanted to get the original of this. It was the main reason that I went to back to the microfilm mines, just to see if, to make sure that the syndicated version had everything. Because oftentimes when you get a version that's from an out-of-town paper, they'll have left out a couple of lines, sometimes an entire paragraph. It's something I found quite a lot with the H.H. Holmes stuff, is sometimes the local articles would have a couple of details that would only really be of interest to the locals, and they would get phased out when it spread around to other places. Now, in this case, I made two particularly shocking revelations to me. One is that I looked up the Chicago Chronicle from this week, and it was a whole different Gene Cowgill article. Looked a week before, it was also a whole different one. I finally found this one in mid-June of 1905, 2 months before that one was published, which puts a whole different spin on it. You know, I thought it was probably not a coincidence that she interviewed him right after he hired her boyfriend as the lawyer, but really he hired him like 6 weeks after the interview with Gene Cowgill. That's a whole different thing. That makes me start thinking maybe Gene Cowgill is the one who talked him into hiring Frank Comerford. It's entirely possible, because not only was it a whole different date, but turns out the Evansville version was missing about half of the text. There was several sections that were taken out here, including one where Hawk rather remarkably claims that he is the great-grandson of General Lewis Hawk, one of Napoleon's top generals who went with him to St. Helena. Which, it almost goes without saying, there was no such person as General Lewis Hawk, as far as I can tell. And other retellings of this article that were probably based on this, they said he was claiming to be the great-grandson of Marshal Ney, who at least was a real person, but did not go to St. Helena with Napoleon, was eventually executed himself, and was almost certainly not the great-great-grandfather of Johann Hawk. There was one German-language paper that just had like a giant 2-column article that took me forever to translate, essentially just saying, can you believe this guy would actually say this? Can you believe the Associated Press actually ran this? People might start thinking that this is true. So this was worth the trip, just finding all of this extra data. It includes a couple of interviews with lawyers just talking about whether they think Hawk is guilty, which generally they don't, which is the really remarkable thing, and what they thought about hanging and the death penalty just to begin with. She muses about that quite a bit here. Makes me think there might be more. There was like one stray line I had seen referring to Gene Cowgill as Johann Hawk's benefactor, and I thought that they were confusing her with a woman by the name of Cora Wilson, who put up the money when he needed money to launch an appeal. But maybe behind the scenes she was doing a lot more pushing to get him off of the hook. We'll find out. I'm still working on it, but that's the whole point of this. But the fact that some of the things that she wrote in there suggest to me that she might have taken a personal interest in trying to get him off of the hook. Maybe trying to show up Evelyn Campbell over at the Chicago American, who just had gotten another convicted murderer off of the hook, a guy who was in jail with Hawk named Jocko Briggs. But I don't know exactly what Evelyn Campbell was writing about them, because the Chicago American reels are missing that particular month. I'm trying to get I've got an idea that it might be on a different reel from a different paper, might have syndicated. I'm still working on that. Also, there were just some random articles that I got while I was there. This one, let me move myself down a little. Anarchist Queen goes to work. Emma Goldman is now a hairdresser. Haven't read through all of that yet. Or also, Phantom Moose puzzles hunters for 40 years. Apparently in southern Montana there were stories about this one moose that could not be killed by bullets. Perhaps it could only be killed by love. I don't know. This seems to be, there's a general sense that this was an urban legend among southern Montana, this mystery moose that couldn't be killed. It's kind of like, the fish that nobody could ever catch. There's also this one about a headless ghost in Indiana, haunting an Indiana town. I haven't read it yet, but man, I'm going to see a headless ghost and save that article for later. And here's one, Confessions of a Crystal Gazer. Crystal balls were a little bit smaller back then. I guess they hadn't figured out that they're a lot flashier if you make them a little bit bigger. So, all right, those are some of the finds from yesterday's. I've got, a similar list of files from the last several weeks that I've been there in the microfilm mines. But here we go. Still reading through all of these. I read the chop suey article last night. It wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be anyway. It's, she doesn't make too many complaints about the chop suey joints that she doesn't make about ice cream parlors. Really, any place that young women might gather where they're not strictly supervised. She herself, I believe, had her wild days. There's one short story she wrote about a girl named Charlotte. which happens to be the name of her daughter, that mentions she nearly gets eaten by a snake when she wanders off of the path when she leaves the fence. And there's a whole thing like about her mother had once wandered off the path and found only heartbreak. So we can put a lot together from this sort of thing psychologically. But all right, I'm still figuring out what to do for Thursday night. Thanksgiving night, we usually do something like trivia, but I haven't really had time to put something together for that. So it might just be a greatest hits show. It might just be a clip show. But we'll do something on Thursday night. We'll always hang out just like we always do. And I'll have my Venmo buttons and everything up there just in case anybody wants to kick in or join the Patreon. If you're on the Patreon, you end up seeing a lot of these full articles. I do end up posting quite a few of them, especially in the deep research tier and the Johann Hawk tier. If you're on the Holmes and Hawk tier right now, in fact, you can kind of like follow along in real time while I work on the Johann Hawk book that I intend to start properly really pretty soon. Right now, I'm still just organizing all of my data and making sure that I've got everything and going through the timeline stuff. The timeline is tricky and complicated. I'm going to throw up a quick thing for the post. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. We probably will spend most of the time on Thursday night just hanging out and chatting. You know, that's what we do. We'll also do some greatest hits, some of my favorite stuff, some of the new stuff that we've found. Maybe I'll play a couple of songs. I don't know. We'll freeform it. I'm trying to take it about as easy as I can this week. It's a holiday week. I'm going to be cooking. I'm going to be cleaning. I'm going to try to catch up on everything. I finally caught up on some of my backlog of emails in the last couple of hours. So yeah, things are going well over here. Hope everything is going well out there. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe, stay strong, stay warm, stay clean. That's what I'm trying to do. But most of all, everybody, stay spooky. Have a great day, everybody.